Welcome to Practicum, Cultivating the Conversation, the Art of Exposition. This is Practicum 2020, and I'm Lisa Bailey, and I'm going to lead you through the cultivation of some grand conversations over the next 3 days. Welcome to Practicum. If you've been to Practicum before, you know exactly what to expect. If this is your first time, if this is your first experience, buckle up. It's part prayer meeting, part pep rally, part how-to workshop. As they say at the water park, you will get wet, you may get soaked. Let's get started. We want to cultivate some rich conversations over the next several days together. And I want to submit to you that cultivating a conversation is a classical Christian pursuit that is beautifully lived out within community. We want to talk over the next several days together about what it means to cultivate. And you'll see lots of garden imagery woven through our time together. I want us to start with the whole idea that education begins with conversation. We want to encourage you to intentionally cultivate conversations with your family, as cultivating a conversation is another way to describe our home-centered education. What are we going to cultivate this week? Conversations, plans, ideas, new information, new relationships, new ways of teaching, reading together. We're going to spend some time examining the classical model, the arts of the trivium you may have heard referred to, the art of grammar, the art of dialectic, and the art of rhetoric. And then we're going to do a deeper dive into reading education. And maybe we'll discover why we need to be teaching reading more intentionally for more years. We know that there are lots of paths that lead toward the education that you want for your children. There are many gates to consider, lots of garden gates. Homeschooling is so full of choices, so many gates to contemplate. So which gate will you choose to walk through as you begin or perhaps continue or even complete your homeschool journey? We are here to consider the classical Christian model of homeschooling as we seek the best education for our children. We're going to spend some time together looking through that particular gate and wrestling with what that means for us practically. Here are some of the questions that we're going to consider together as we ponder that classical Christian model and think about what it looks like to live that out in community. Questions that you guys might be wrestling with now. What should I do? Right? How can I or how should I do it? And then, will that work? Or how did that work? Here's what I want you to know about this journey. First, it could be amazing. I want you to be inspired about what your journey could look like. 2, we believe you can do this. You are going to be encouraged to step out on the journey and keep going. 3rd, here's how. We're going to give you the tools. We're going to equip you to homeschool your children successfully and joyfully. Essentially, what we're asking is, how do you want your garden to grow? Let's think about how a garden grows. First, you cultivate the soil. You don't plant the seeds before you cultivate the soil. So you cultivate the soil, then you plant the seeds. You provide attention and nutrients. Hopefully, surely, you enjoy the process. You reap a harvest, and then you're not done. You need to prepare for and invest in the future. These are some very rich metaphors that we're going to pursue in our time together. I want you to think about your job as a cultivator, as a planter, as a nurturer, and as a harvester over the next several days. Here we go. Cultivating the soil. Okay, as we get started, you might be thinking, how do I begin? Or if you feel like you started and the road has gotten rocky, how do I begin again? Cultivating the soil involves knowing your soil. What is already there? What needs to be added? What needs to be taken away? Every plot of ground is different. Each can become a garden, but all need something special to come to fruition. In homeschooling, you may need to attend to and amend both your environment and your children. We're going to look at both the environment for our education and we're going to look at our kids. The classical Christian community we want to discuss is very different from the environment that many of us are accustomed to. So today, let's focus on the classical part of that environment. I want to say to you that I believe cultivating a conversation is a classical pursuit. You may be saying to me, what does it mean to be classical in our education pursuit? Classical instead of what? Let me throw that question back at you. What do you think it means to be classical? Okay, some of you, yes, are saying it is that old tried and true method. It's like classical education is traditional education. Some of you have said something about Greek education or philosophy and studying Greek and studying Latin, and that seems classical to many of us. Somebody else. Okay, some of you have the idea that classical education is an education that practices integration, that practices pulling things together, that doesn't have divided subjects so much as it has a broad understanding of how all of the subjects are related. Sure.
Study of old things.
Study of old things. Some of us think of classical education as the study of old things. Some of you have mentioned tools. You have some idea that there are ways that make learning classically different from learning in the modern era. Pursuing a conversation is a classical pursuit, and that a classical education calls us to integrate, to think, and to connect. A classical education encourages us to integrate ideas from different disciplines. How do things fit together? It calls us to think about the connections between people and places, events, arts, sciences, philosophies, even technologies. Now, how is this different from the education that you might have had or the education that you see offered by others? Okay, yeah. A lot of us were educated in a system where we studied math and we studied foreign language and we studied history and we studied literature and we did it in all separate classrooms with different teachers. And, the old adage is my teacher gives homework like she thinks nobody else is giving me homework. That's, everybody complains about that. But many of us attended schools where the literature teacher never mentioned anything about history or science to us and never showed us how foreign language related to any of the rest of our curriculum, right? So what does it mean to integrate, to think, and to connect with regards to education? What would that even look like? Well, look at this. How is this a picture of the classical education model? Yeah, all that imagery that you guys are noticing, the circle, how everything is unified, everything is inside the circle, so everything's part of the same system. Yes, the arrows that you are all seeing, connecting the subjects to one another and to the middle where God is what is holding all of the subjects together. All of the subjects are unified. Here's the truth. We live in a universe where all things work together. So here is a picture of what we are pursuing. Classical Christian education calls us to integrate ideas from different disciplines, examining how they impact one another and how they're related. Classical education calls us to think about the connections between people and events and all of that. A classical education puts God, man, creation, and all the subjects of the world in proper relation. It fits us. It's an education that will prepare our students to know God and to make him known. This is an education worth building. So cultivating a conversation is a classical pursuit when we realize that our knowledge has a beginning phase where we develop some vocabulary, some grammar that allows us to talk about a subject, a developing phase where we begin to recognize context and to make some connections, and then an application phase where we use our insights to impact our world. So the art of grammar, the art of dialectic, and the art of rhetoric, it's a description of how we learn in layers. I want you to think about something that you have taught your children to do. I want to show you that you already understand learning in layers, even if you don't know the terms, the art of grammar, the art of dialectic, and the art of rhetoric, okay? All right, so what about tying your shoes? Almost all of us have taught our children to tie their shoes. Now, how did they go from knowing nothing about tying their shoes to being able to do it and even show a younger sibling how to do it? Right. You had to begin intentionally teaching them the names of things because you had to call a shoestring, and a bow, and the tongue of a shoe by its name. You had to have a vocabulary to even start talking to your child about it. Okay, you had to share the vocabulary. So you told them you take the string in your right hand and you take a string in your left hand, and you talked about what you did. What you did was the dialectic. You are connecting the dots of that thing that you're talking about to what it does and how it needs to relate to the next part, how one side needs to relate to the other side and how they together make a knot. And what's the difference between a knot and a bow? And how do you make that loop? And how tightly do you pull it? So the dialectic was connecting the dots of the vocabulary into what you do with those things. And then the application arrived. One day, they finally were able to make a bow, even if it was so loose, it came untied right after that, right? And then what happened? They continued to practice over and over and over. They applied the learning, the layers of learning, until they were successfully tying their shoes almost every time. And then they got to pat themselves on the back as they were able to turn around and teach a younger sibling to do that. Look, this is an example of learning in layers. Now turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor about something that you already realize you taught your child classically, even though you didn't know what the grammar was, what the dialectic was, and what the rhetoric art of it was before this moment. Look, this is a great way for you to see that you recognize learning in layers and you are now gaining a new vocabulary. This is what learning in layers might look like academically. Here's the big picture, the classical model in a nutshell. All right. In the middle, we have God who is holding this all together. Around are arranged what some people call subjects, but I like to see more as groups of skills. These are skills that we are going to practice with our students for years and years. And we're going to use specific subjects to hone and sharpen these skills. And we're going to see how each of these skills are related to one another and how they depend on one another. But what I want you to look at first are these banners around the edge of the circle. These represent the arts of the trivium. what we talked about just a second ago. The art of grammar, the art of dialectic, the art of rhetoric. Now, let's look. There are other words on those banners. I know you noticed, okay? They are words that relate to the arts. Let's look what is in the banner with grammar, knowledge. The art of grammar is about building a foundation of knowledge. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. The art of grammar, the art of dialectic is all about building our understanding, growing and understanding. What I want you to see is that these banners are shaped like arrows. Each art leads to the next one. Just as knowledge acquired leads to understanding that has been built, and on around to, wow, celebration. That's going to be an interesting discussion that we're going to have in a day or so. What I want you to grab a hold of is that this is learning in layers. The art of grammar, the art of dialectic, and the art of rhetoric together lead us to what I think is our highest calling. It's doxology. Look, as we begin to build a foundation of knowledge, as we gather information to know, we can grow in our understanding as we make those connections. And as we become convinced of the understanding of the knowledge we've acquired, we develop some real wisdom. We are able to use that wisdom to move people and to solve problems. And when we do that, we recognize the full purpose of education: to know God and make him known, to recognize, praise God, from whom all blessings flow, which is what doxology is. And then if you notice, that doxology arrow propels itself right back in to the circle. So really, if I could be with you 3D in the flesh, I would show you that this circle is not a two-dimensional wheel. It's actually a spiral that goes up and up and up. As we learn more, we understand more, and we're moved to apply the understanding of our knowledge, which motivates us to praise God, from whom all knowledge and blessings flow. But when we recognize that God has so much to tell us, we want to know more. And so we start, see that arrow keeps going. We start around the circle again because we want to know more so that we can understand more, so that we can pass on more, so that we continue in celebration. And I think it'll be a spiral that goes up and up and up toward heaven until the Lord comes back. It's very exciting to me. I hope it will become very exciting to you. The art of grammar is where we want to start. The art of grammar is the beginning point of the exploration of any subject at any age. Okay, so do you hear me? It's not just for the littlest learners. It's for the beginning learners, no matter how old they are. Okay, this is where our education starts. It takes place as we recognize the structure underlying the subject and as we build a vocabulary by naming what is it. Okay, so grammar, the art of grammar, comprises the words and the forms and the categories that make up the framework of any given subject. Okay, now, our littlest learners love the art of grammar because they have got so much to learn about so much that they are more predisposed to work on the art of grammar and building a vocabulary and learning to recognize an underlying structure of organizing their thoughts, all right? They are doing that so that they can build a foundation of knowledge. I want you to think about how Jesus taught. Jesus is like the best teacher ever. So think about the way that Jesus commonly taught people about new ideas. What did he do? He told stories. That's why stories is there on that banner. Often the easiest way for us to pass on new information in a way that will stick with us is by sharing a story. Learning the basics by hearing and telling and reading stories. Now, you might be asking, okay, cool, but what does this have to do with me and my kids? You, as the gardener, are going to constantly ask that question over the next week. We're going to help you sort it out, and you'll soon see how everything fits together. Look at the blue banner again. Remember the art of grammar? We talked about building the foundation of knowledge. We talked about how much our little kids like to hear stories. They are frequently the most invested among us in the art of grammar. Our littlest learners have so much to learn about so much that the art of grammar is a happy place for them to start. A happy place. So let's look at another graphic that's going to help us understand not just the arts of learning, but about when our students will be happiest to practice those arts. All right, let's interpret the graph together so that it'll be really useful for us. Across the bottom, you have the arts of the trivium, words that you already know because you've been introduced to the art of grammar, the art of dialectic, and the art of rhetoric. Up the side, we've got some developmental stages of children. Okay, developmental stages of children, young children, adolescents, and young adults. You guys recognize that. Now, you might not recognize Paul Parrot, pert, and poetic. Those are labels that were coined by Dorothy Sayers, who wrote and spoke about education. And you can read her full essay, The Lost Tools of Learning in Classical Christian Education Made Approachable. It's a book you can get from the Classical Conversations bookstore. She describes these developmental stages of children because for her, it was really important that you understand what your children are like at every stage of development, what they are able to do, what they are eager to do, and what they're happy to do. Okay, so this graphic is going to help us to see not where the art of the trivium is absolutely practiced, but where developmentally your student will be happiest to practice that art, where it will be easiest to pass along that art. So let's look. The dark shading indicates the art of the trivium that's going to come most naturally to each stage of development. So young children and the art of grammar intersect here. The darkest shade is right here. So who is happiest to practice the art of grammar, the art of building a vocabulary and seeing and finding and internalizing the structure of a subject? Our littlest learners, okay? So why? Why? Well, it has to do with what our littlest learners are like. So let's focus this morning on those littlest learners, those who are most invested in the art of grammar. If we want to cultivate that soil well, we need to know it. So you tell me, what are your littlest learners like? Here they are, coloring. What are your littlest learners like? Okay, they're active. Yes, they like to move around, and they like to run, and they jump, and they sing, and they dance, and sometimes while you're trying to talk to them, okay? They are very curious. They don't know a lot about a lot of things, but they're very eager to know. They want to find out, and they're curious about a lot of things, not just the things that they think they're supposed to be curious about. They're open. Yes, they're open to everything.
Like repetition?
They love repetition. And you know that because if they have a favorite book, it will soon become your least favorite book because they want to hear it over and over and over. They are able to hear the same information over and over happily, which turns out to be a good thing because repetition is the way we learn. And so it makes our littles able to learn readily that they love repetition. What else? They believe what you tell them. This is the thing that endears littlest learners to me. When my girls were little, my husband David and I had two lovely daughters, and we still do. But when they were little, they loved to ask me questions, and they waited for my answer. They really thought that I knew everything. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, they've grown up and they know that to not be true. But when they were littlest learners, they loved for me to tell them things. Okay. So they were happy to ask a question and have me provide all or most all of the answers. What else? Yes, they love stories. You remember that from the banner a minute ago. They love to tell stories. They love to hear stories. They love to read stories. So how do we train our littlest learners to become thinkers? Well, we lead them to work as they're able. That pertains to our academic realm and how our children learn best. So what are they like? Well, you've been telling me. What do they enjoy? You've been telling me. What are they good at? They're great at memorizing. If you have ever asked your child to memorize something, you will discover that they can memorize. Hey, if you've ever hoped your child wasn't listening, then you find out they've memorized almost without effort things that you didn't even know they could hear. Okay, so they're good at memorizing. What do they do on their own? They make up stories and they play and they sing and they act things out and they try things out. Here's the thing. If we capture how they are and how they naturally learn, we connect with them and help them approach learning more happily and more easily. Academics become approachable for all of us, okay? So if you will lead them to work as they're able, if you give them lots of things to memorize, if you answer lots of questions, if you give them lots of hands-on projects, if you allow them to run and jump and play and sing as you teach them, then they will find education natural and interesting. We recognize the natural characteristics of young children, what they're good at, what they find interesting, what's easiest for them, what they need. We know that what they need to do is acquire knowledge, right? And we recognize how they're wired by God to learn. So we lead them in ways that are natural to their development as they build that foundation of knowledge and grammar. Now, we also mold them as they ought to become. This speaks to their spiritual life and growth. This allows us to train them up as they ought to go. And this emphasizes our role as spiritual leaders in the home. We know that our highest calling is to lead our children to know God. Okay? We want them to know academic things. We want them to grow to become thinkers, but we also want them to grow to know the Lord and love the Lord. All right. Given our understanding of our littlest learners and what they need, how can we help them learn? How can we help them grow? How do we plant the seeds? Once we know the soil and we're cultivating the soil, how do we plant the seeds? Okay, so what are the seeds and how do we plant the seeds? Well, think about it. For our littlest learners, the seeds, those are those pieces of information. At Classical Conversations, we call them memory pegs. It's all the pieces of information, all the names and the dates and the places. We want them to have all of the activities that will lead them into learning. We want them to have all the tools that they could have. We want to give them relationships that will make learning comforting and fun and sure. So how do we plant these seeds? We plant seeds by telling, by showing, by reading, by doing all the things that you guys told me a few minutes ago that you do with your littlest learners. How do you plant seeds? A lot of times the best way to plant a seed is with a tool. If you have a big garden, you probably need a tool to help you plant those seeds. So why is a tool so good? What good are tools in a garden? Yeah, a tool a lot of times makes the work easier. Using a tool, especially the right tool, can make the work quicker. The right tool is less disturbing of the surroundings. Okay. Tools are also fun to use. A lot of times you will learn new skills just by using a new tool. So the tool can teach new skills in itself. So look, here are some tools, some great tools to use with your littlest learner, with your Paul Parrot children. Tools to help me plant. These are the 5 core habits. CC, Classical Conversations community members will recognize these as naming, attending, memorizing, expressing, and storytelling. So think about what these would look like at home. Think about the things that you teach at home. Think about our shoestring, tying our shoes example, or the example you shared with your neighbor. How could names fit in there? Okay. What did you have to attend to when you taught that new skill? What did you have to pay attention to do first and second and instead of? I want you to think, do you and your children memorize anything now? Many of you are probably memorizing scripture with your children. Think how easy it is for them to memorize those scripture verses. Think how easy it would be for them to memorize all kinds of other things. What could you be memorizing with children? Think about how you and your kids can express what you're learning together. Could you make up a song about it? Have you ever made up hand motions to go with one of the Bible verses that you're trying to learn? How could you use the expression of what you're learning to share with somebody else? How could you repackage what you're teaching your kids for them to review? Think about the stories that you enjoy telling or reading. And think about how stories help your children learn. Many of us tell our children cautionary tales to help them learn lessons that'll save them from a mistake. Or we tell them stories from our past, hoping that they won't make the same mistakes that we did. How are these, naming, attending, memorizing, expressing, and storytelling, appropriate for your littles? But I also want you to think about how these tools are appropriate for your older students as well. And how important is it for students of any age to attend to what's going on and to what else is being said or expressed or shown? What place does storytelling have in the education of all of us? All right. When it comes to what comes after planting seeds, okay, we cultivated the soil. We know about planting the seeds. What comes after the planting of seeds in your garden? Well, if you want to have something actually come up, you need to spend some time and some attention giving nutrients to the soil, right? How do we cultivate conversations at every stage of life? Look, how do you help your garden grow? You give it attention and nutrients. How can you help your home-centered education flourish? Well, you can cultivate conversations. You can model the learning process, and you can use the tools. These are all ways to provide attention and nutrients. So think about, how do you cultivate conversations with your littlest learners? What do you talk about with them? What do you talk about with your middle schoolers? What do you talk about with your older students? I bet it's different stuff. How do you start the conversations? Just as our children change, so must our conversations and our conversational style. I want you to tuck that away. We're going to be talking about that as we go through the week together. How, as our children change and grow, we as teachers need to change and grow.
You also have to pull weeds as you provide attention.
Yes, pulling weeds is part of paying attention. And that conversation that you have with your students of all ages will help you see the weeds that might be trying to come up and threaten the success of your fledgling plants. Now, how are you modeling the learning process? I want to ask you that. I want you to look honestly at your habits as a learner at home. How are you modeling the learning process? How do you name things in your everyday life? What are you naming? To what are you attending? What are you working to memorize? Are you expressing what you've learned in any original way? Are you telling stories to anyone else about what you've learned? What's the last new thing you learned? For a lot of us, it has to do with technology, okay? How did that go? How could that learning process have gone more smoothly? How could you have been helped maybe by some of these tools that we just talked about? I want us to practice. I want us to practice with those tools ourselves so that we are all confident that we could model that learning at home. We're going to practice naming, attending, memorizing, expressing, and storytelling together. And we're going to use a poem, and you're going to see how easy that's going to be. We are going to read a poem together from this book, Old World Echoes. It's a poem entitled The Swing. And then we are going to have a conversation about it. And we're going to use the 5 core habits to structure our conversation. All right, let's read the poem together. How do you like to go up in a swing, up in the air so blue? Oh, I do think it's the pleasantest thing ever a child can do. Up in the air and over the wall till I can see so wide, rivers and trees and cattle and all over the countryside, till I look down on the garden green, down on the roof so brown. Up in the air I go flying again, up in the air and down. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that poem in the mid-1800s. What do you notice? First of all, let me ask you this. How does that poem make you feel? It's a fun poem. It makes me want to go swing. Now, I will admit that the swing is my favorite piece of playground equipment. So lots of things make me want to go swing. But this poem has a feeling of going up and down for me. So there's a feeling that I get when I read this poem, especially when I read it out loud with a bunch of friends. Let's use names together to cultivate a conversation about this poem, though. Okay? So what could you name? If you wanted to get a conversation started and you read this poem, what would you say to your littlest learners or your middles or your older children? What stands out? What would you name? A swing, okay? And so some of you might be thinking, well, that's not really much to name. It's just a swing. But look, aren't there lots of different kinds of swings? Now, you're thinking that it's a swing with just a bottom and two, because that's the picture that you see. But what other swings do you know? Porch swings, tire swings, a baby swing, a rope swing. One of my favorite swings when I was about 3rd grade was at my church's day camp. It was way off, tucked into the woods, and it was a rope that was hanging from, to me, it felt absolutely enormous. Like I cannot even imagine how tall this tree was or how they got to the limb that they hung the rope on. Now, of course, it's probably not nearly as big as it is in my 8-year-old mind. But this was an immense tree in a clearing, and there was a giant rope thrown over the limb of the tree and nothing but a huge knot on the end of that rope. And the whole activity attached to that station of our day camp was that rope swing. And when it was your turn, you got to run up, hold on to the rope, jump up, put your legs around the knot, and then be swung by your camp counselor as high as you could go. And they could swing you really high. Now, probably nobody would be able, no church would take on the liability of such a swing now, okay? But that is the kind of swing that I remember, okay? Think about the conversations that you could have just by naming swing. You could share memories. Your children could share memories of their favorite swing. All we've done is name a swing. What do you think this swinger can see? It tells us. What is it? Let's name some things that the swinger sees. A roof. So you know that this kid is swinging high enough to see the roof. Woo, for some mamas, that's too high. But for a kid, that's perfection. What else? A wall. Okay, so the swing is obviously outside because you're seeing outside stuff. A roof and a wall. What else do you see? Rivers and trees. So yes, we're out. So are we in the city or we're in the country? Well, rivers and trees could be anywhere. And it says over the country, and cattle, very much cattle. So there, you know that you're outside. Okay, just by naming, you're able to talk a lot about this point. There's way more in here than we thought there was. What else can this swinger see? A garden. What time of year? Is this the fall or the winter?
Summer, spring.
How do you know?
The garden's green.
Okay, you are practicing attending. You are attending to what's going on this poem, and you are learning more than what's on the surface just by attending to the details. So it's summer or fall because the garden is green, the roofs are brown, and how does this child feel? Free. Oh, how can you tell that this little child feels free? Well, they like it. They feel like they're flying. Do you have any memories of swinging so high that you felt like you were flying? Oh man, we have lots of memories of swinging. Your children have memories of swinging. Some of them may have memories of falling off a swing, okay? Or jumping out of a swing. These are great memories that lead to some really fun storytelling, okay? Memories that can lead to some storytelling. Memories that can lead to some expressing. So we were pretending to be birds. We were pretending to be, I can remember expressing my story of being a trapeze artist, okay? I pretended that I was in the circus sometimes when I was on a swing, and that involved a lot of jumping out and sometimes trying to hold on to other things, which sometimes was okay and sometimes not successful. But that's a memory that I could share, okay? So you guys, can you see how talking over a poem could be fun? Can you imagine trying this at home? I think that all of us can. Did you enjoy this? Do you enjoy your homeschooling journey? What helps you find joy on the journey? I have to tell you, we are way more winsome as parent teachers when we are enjoying the process. How can we enjoy the process? I know there are some weeks when homeschooling is hard. Let's be real. Homeschooling is hard, and keeping going is hard, and seeing progress is hard. But we need to work on enjoying the journey if we want to be winsome and make learning a happy time for our students. We enjoy the process by resting sometimes, not just pushing to the end, but enjoying the process by resting and playing, by relishing the small moments and not waiting till the big accomplishment at the end to take a deep breath and give out a smile. We enjoy the process by reading and by doing, by going outside, by getting away from the house. Look, home-centered is not stuck at home most of the time, okay? How are you enjoying your homeschooling journey? And what helps you find joy on the journey? Turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor one thing that helps you stay joyful on your journey. Now, the truth, in order to enjoy this journey, sometimes we just need to stop. Sometimes we need to be together in community. We need to build one another up. We need to sharpen one another. Sometimes we just need to stop and think about things. Sometimes we need to stop and think and talk about things. The highest things exist in friendship and in contemplation. At its best, the human being exists to converse with friends, wherein each seeks to know the truth. I hope you're enjoying thinking together. I want you to consider, what do you think about and who do you think about? Who do you think with routinely? Why not find some thinking buddies? What's the ultimate goal of a garden? Yes, to reap a harvest. We want to think for just a second about, what does a good harvest look like? And how do we assess the harvest? And what else might be part of the harvesting process? The truth is that part of harvest time is assessing. Part is asking questions about and assessing what you see, and part is preparing for the next season, okay? I'll admit, assessment is a tough topic for many of people. It's easier, I will tell you this though, it's easier to assess the end if you had a goal to begin with. So be sure to set goals for each of your years, for each of your children, and revisit those goals often. And look, be realistic about the interim progress, not just assessment at the end. I also want to share that asking questions is a good bridge between assessment and future planning, which a lot of you are looking towards right now. You can ask questions like, what went well? Why was that successful? Okay, what needs to change? Why does that need to change? Don't just think about negative things, though. What were some of your unexpected blessings? And knowing what you know, what are some anticipated growing pains? Preparing for the next growing season is often best done as the current season winds down. So for us, now is the optimal time to begin planning for the next growing season. Here's the thing, you know what worked. You know what challenges you faced. You remember where you left off, okay? Now, perhaps you haven't thought about your homeschooling goals, your overall goals, or your specific goals in quite a while. Maybe the goals for each one of your children need tweaking. Take a moment and ponder these questions. I want to give you some time to write in your journal, what's the purpose of your journey? Where are you going? Knowing that, what's the best route to take? What might you expect to see along the way? And what tools do you have or do you suspect might make your journey possible, productive, even praiseworthy? You may want to begin writing now and take these questions home to think about more deeply tonight, right? Here's a thought. If you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. What small changes do you want to make? What could you do differently? What major changes seem necessary? And where might you need to change the way you see your students or your plans or your processes? You see, we want to keep going. We want to keep growing. We want to keep investing for the future. Remember, that's the last how does your garden grow step. Investing for the future. We want to keep learning. We want to ask new questions. We want to mentor others as we grow. We want to become a leader. So where do you want to go from here? Classical Conversations is here to help you. Here are some places to go to look for help, to look for growing opportunities. And here's some resources that you can grab a hold of, especially if you're looking for some great read alouds for the whole family. Check out these resources full of good ideas and poems and stories and speeches and documents, and you'll find the swing in this one, Old World Echoes.